Two steps back. This editorial examines the erosion of institutions in our divided society, arguing that despite brief moments of progress, regressive moves have left our democratic structures increasingly weakened. It's sad driving on Constitution Avenue, Islamabad, even after 26/11s. Sad driving on Constitution Avenue is a figurative image, implying that despite external signs of stability, the buildings are intact, but X-ray eyes can vividly see the gutted institutions inside. X-ray eyes is a metaphor suggesting that a deeper analysis reveals the damaged core of institutions. Gutted institutions means that while physical structures appear sound, their essential functions and integrity have been destroyed. Global works like Why Nations Fail see inclusive institutions as the key to progress. This sentence references the influential book Why Nations Fail to emphasize that worldwide, inclusive institutions are considered fundamental for a nation's development. But at home, one sadly sees deinstitutionalization at the hands of the unelected masters of our fate. Deinstitutionalization refers to the gradual disintegration of established institutions. Unelected masters of our fate is an idiomatic expression criticizing the unaccountable, powerful figures controlling national affairs. Strong institutions emerge more easily in homogeneous, equal societies. Homogeneous and equal societies refer to communities with similar backgrounds and equitable distributions of power, which tend to nurture robust institutions. But in divided, unequal ones, they get captured by elites from strong ethnicities for their own interests. Get captured means to be taken over or controlled. This sentence suggests that in fractured societies, powerful elite groups co-opt institutions for personal gain. Only grassroots democracy helps overcome division and elitism and bolsters institutions in such societies. Grassroots democracy means political participation at the community level, which can counterbalance elite dominance. Top-down institutional efforts by donors fail. Top-down efforts refer to strategies imposed from higher authorities, often ineffective in addressing deep-rooted societal issues. Being a highly divided, elitist society, our institutions were always elite-run. This acknowledges a historical pattern where the country's institutions have consistently been controlled by a privileged few. But after 60 years, we saw some change after the 2008 polls. Indicates that there was a brief period of reform following the 2008 elections, suggesting hope for improvement. To explain its high value, I classify national institutions. The author introduces a framework for understanding institutions, implying that not all institutions are equal in their role or impact. Among state institutions, the executive governance ones deliver routine services, while strategic ones such as the courts, the Election Commission of Pakistan, ERCP, interim regimes, and the National Accountability Bureau, NAB, deepen democracy via transparency and accountability. Executive governance institutions are responsible for everyday functions, whereas strategic institutions play a crucial role in ensuring democratic principles through checks and balances. Societal institutions like the media and civil society do so too, albeit informally. This sentence emphasizes that non-governmental entities also contribute to democratic accountability, though in a less formalized manner. Executive institutions did not improve, and misrule persisted. Despite some reforms, the routine functioning of government institutions remained problematic, leading to continued poor governance. Even so, some change in democracy institutions excited analysts, as permanent change in them slowly but surely leads to sustainable change in governance institutions. The sentence suggests that reforms in key democratic institutions, though gradual, are essential for long-term improvement in governance. The key steps were the approval of the 18th and 19th Amendments by a fairly elected parliament with some push by reinstated judges. These amendments represent significant constitutional reforms achieved through a relatively democratic process with judicial support. The role of filling key posts in strategic institutions moved from executive to bipartisan parliamentary and judicial committees, which made the former more independent and neutral. This change shifted appointment power away from the executive, promoting greater independence and fairness in strategic institutions. These moves were proudly our best political innovations and novel global models for weak democracies. The phrase, best political innovations, is a laudatory statement, emphasizing that these reforms were groundbreaking for emerging democracies. Societal institutions, too, had more freedom. Highlights that non-state bodies, such as the media and civil society, gained increased autonomy as a result of these reforms. Naive democracy buffs hoped these moves would aid governance, even if slowly, given the huge task and the legacy of the autocratic era. Naive democracy buffs is an informal, somewhat pejorative term for idealistic supporters of democracy, suggesting that while their hopes were well-intentioned, the challenges were immense. Divided institutions are captured by the elites. This statement, serving as a subheading, reiterates the earlier point that fragmented institutions tend to be dominated by powerful, self-interested groups. But risky moves by the learner driver alarmed our masters of fate into slamming their remote emergency brakes. The learner driver is a metaphor for inexperienced reformers or those attempting change. Slamming their remote emergency brakes is a vivid, idiomatic expression indicating that the ruling elites reacted strongly to halt these reforms. After being in the driving seat for 10 years, they had taken a breather under a mild hybridity, leaving the economy and politics mostly to civilians. In the driving seat is an idiom meaning in control. Taking a breather means temporarily relaxed control. Mild hybridity implies a mix of old and new governance practices. The 10-year itch hit hard in 2017. The 10-year itch is a metaphor suggesting that after a decade, there was a strong desire for change or disruption, which manifested in 2017. Polls were rigged in 2018 after the two fair ones. Rigged polls mean elections manipulated to favor a particular outcome. This indicates a return to undemocratic practices after a brief period of fairness. The PTI era nixed some gains. Nixed means nullified or canceled. This implies that the progress achieved earlier was undone during the PTI administration. But the PPP and PMLN were punishingly made to more deeply erase the gains they had achieved earlier. Punishingly made is an adverbial phrase emphasizing that the actions taken by these parties resulted in a severe rollback of earlier reforms. Both being elitist parties, they complied meekly. Complied meekly means they followed orders or accepted decisions without strong resistance, reflecting their elitist nature. Institutions that hold rulers accountable were weakened more structurally, while ad hoc ones like the CSS gained. This sentence contrasts long-standing formal accountability institutions with temporary or improvised bodies, such as the CSS, which emerged during crises. Hierarchical ones, such as the ECP and NAB, were tamed via carrot and stick. Carrot and stick is an idiomatic expression meaning a system of rewards and punishments used to control behavior. This shows the fragility of constitutional processes. The sentence underscores that the constitutional framework is vulnerable to manipulation and weakening. Earlier, changes in the ECP and interim regimes had worked well in 2013 and even 2018. The rigging then affected them. This indicates that previous reforms had been effective, but later electoral rigging undermined these improvements. Alleged wide-scale rigging in the 2024 polls gave another sham regime. Wide-scale rigging suggests extensive electoral fraud. Sham regime implies a government that lacks legitimacy. Lawyer bodies were perceived as being bribed. This means that legal associations or bar councils were seen as compromised by corruption. The media saw huge pressure on journalists, social media gags, and controversial tweaks to the cybercrime laws. Social media gags is informal jargon referring to restrictions or censorship on social platforms. This sentence lists various pressures and manipulations affecting free speech. The courts, too, were not immune. This indicates that even the judicial system was subject to undue influence. Using the shortcomings of some former judges as an excuse, executive sway in the hiring of judges was reintroduced even though the former judges had been hired by the executive before the 19th Amendment passed this role mainly and rightly to the judges. This complex sentence criticizes the reassertion of executive control over judicial appointments, despite previous reforms intended to secure judicial independence. Sway means influence or control. But we didn't wait to see its benefits over time. This implies that the potential positive outcomes of the reform were never given a chance to materialize. Our Constitution has a basic structure given in Article 8 that declares void all laws that cut basic rights. This sentence explains that Article 8 of the Constitution protects fundamental rights by invalidating laws that infringe on them. One such right is fair trials, which only free courts can hold. Fair trials are a basic legal right, emphasizing the importance of judicial independence. Parts of the 26th Amendment cut this freedom and so violate this basic structure. This suggests that provisions in the 26th Amendment undermine fair trial rights, thus breaching constitutional guarantees. Thus, many say they were void ab initio and never binding on the courts. Void ab initio is a legal term meaning invalid from the outset. This indicates that some laws are argued to have been null from the beginning. The Supreme Court should have taken suo motu notice immediately then. Suo motu notice means that the court should have independently initiated action without waiting for a complaint. It can and must do even now to have the earlier full court review them. This is a call for the Supreme Court to act now to re-examine and potentially nullify these problematic laws. So ended sadly our brief affair with even minor institutionalization, with one step forward and two backwards. This closing statement uses the title as a metaphor, summarizing the overall regression. One step forward and two backwards is an idiomatic expression indicating that progress has been more than offset by setbacks. As key institutions stand hugely weakened, many ask grimly if they'll ever be allowed to flourish. Grimly asks implies a pessimistic view about the future of these institutions. The reversals are so huge they may languish for long. Languish means to remain in an unpleasant or stagnant state. This suggests that the damage may persist for an extended period. But illusion sadly persists among some that we can progress with ad hoc institutions and hybrid rule without strong institutions and the rule of law. Illusion here refers to a false belief. Ad hoc institutions and hybrid rule imply temporary or mixed forms of governance that lack the robustness of true democratic structures. Society can't wait for the 10-year itch to subside naturally and briefly. The 10-year itch is a metaphor for a recurring period of instability or dissatisfaction. This implies that relying on time alone to resolve issues is insufficient. It must unite to peacefully end the itch for good or risk being a poster kid for why nations fail. Poster kid is an idiomatic expression meaning a prime example or illustration. This final call to action stresses that society must come together to resolve these issues permanently to avoid becoming a cautionary tale for failed nations. The writer is a political economist with a PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, and has senior-level work experience across 50 countries. Murtaza Niaz at yahoo.com, X at NiazMurtaza2, published in